The throne room of Morvain had never been so silent. Rhiannon pressed herself against the cold stone pillar in the musician's gallery, her breath catching in her throat as she watched the scene unfold 3 stories below. The entire noble court had assembled, their faces turned toward the dais where Alpha King Davros stood like a statue carved from midnight and marble. She shouldn't have come. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run, to hide in the laundry quarters where she had spent the last week avoiding this exact moment. But Davros had not sent for her. No message, no whispered explanation through trusted servants. Nothing but 7 days of deafening silence after 6 months of whispered promises in moonlit gardens. So she had climbed the servants' stairs to see for herself. From her hidden vantage point, Rhiannon could see the rigid set of his shoulders beneath the ceremonial crimson and black, the way his jaw clenched as the high priestess droned through the ancient rites. His dark blonde hair was pulled back severely, revealing the sharp angles of his face. Even from this distance, she could see the amber eyes that had once looked at her with such desperate hunger now staring blankly ahead. For half a year, she had known another side of him. The man who had traced the curve of her spine in the darkness of the archives. The man whose voice broke when he whispered her name. The man who had bitten her shoulder blade in a claiming so secret, so forbidden, that she had worn high-neck dresses ever since to hide the mark from curious eyes. "When I settle the council's demands," he had promised, his lips against the claimed skin, "I will announce you. Common-born or not, you are my fated mate, Rhiannon. Nothing in this world or the next can change that." She had believed every word. Her hand moved unconsciously to her lower abdomen, where an even more dangerous secret grew. A secret she had been waiting for the right moment to tell him. Tonight, she had thought. After this farce of a ceremony, when he came to her as he always did, she would tell him about the child. Their child. "Let the candidates approach," the high priestess announced, her reedy voice somehow carrying through the vast chamber. Rhiannon's nails bit into her palms as 4 women in flowing silver gowns ascended the dais steps. Daughters of the 4 cardinal houses, each one breathtaking, each one raised from infancy for the possibility of standing exactly where they stood now. And at their center, her hair the color of burnished copper and her eyes like chips of jade, walked Morgaine of House Talros. The crowd murmured approval. The Talros family controlled the Western Mountains, commanded 5,000 warriors, and had been maneuvering their daughter toward this moment for decades. Some said Morgaine had been betrothed to Davros in their cradles, that this ceremony was merely a formality. Rhiannon searched Davros's face for any sign of the man she loved, any flicker of warmth, of recognition, of the fierce devotion he had sworn was eternal and unbreakable. His expression could have been carved from ice. "Davros, Alpha King of Morvain, blood of the first shifters," the high priestess intoned. "You have consulted with your council. You have reviewed the treaties and bloodlines. Your kingdom awaits your choice." The silence stretched like a blade between Rhiannon's ribs. She stopped breathing. The mark on her shoulder blade burned beneath her dress, a phantom heat that pulsed in time with her racing heart. Surely he could feel it too. Surely he would turn, would scan the galleries until he found her, would declare that his choice had been made months ago in secret places where 2 souls recognized each other as mates. Davros stepped forward. His movement was wrong, Rhiannon realized with dawning horror. Too stiff, too mechanical. His usual fluid grace, the predatory elegance that marked him as alpha, was completely absent. And his eyes, those amber eyes that had blazed with passion when he looked at her, were flat, empty, like someone had extinguished the fire behind them. "I choose," his voice rang out, hollow as a tomb. "Morgaine of House Talros." The throne room erupted in celebration. Rhiannon felt the world tilt sideways. Nobles embraced, cheering. Warriors howled their approval, the sound shaking the ancient stones. The political alliance that would unite the mountains with the crown, securing Morvain's borders for generations, had been sealed, and Rhiannon felt something inside her chest shatter into 1,000 cutting pieces. The mark on her shoulder blade flared with sudden, searing agony. She gasped, doubling over in the shadows of the gallery, her hand flying to the spot where his teeth had once claimed her flesh. It felt like her skin was being flayed from her body, like the claiming itself was being ripped away. Through tear-blurred vision, she watched Davros take Morgaine's hand, watched him raise it to his lips in the traditional gesture of acceptance. Watched the copper-haired woman smile with cold triumph while the man Rhiannon loved showed absolutely nothing at all. He didn't look for her in the crowd. He didn't hesitate. He didn't seem to remember she existed. A sob tore from Rhiannon's throat, lost in the cacophony of celebration. She stumbled backward, desperate to escape before the grief crushed her completely. Her shoulder struck the gallery railing, sending pain shooting through her marked flesh. But she barely felt it. She had to get out, had to run, had to flee before she collapsed, and someone found the common serving girl who had been foolish enough to believe an alpha king could love her. I know this story is getting intense, but my older sister told me I'd never reach 1,000 subscribers before this week ends. She said my stories aren't good enough, that I'm wasting my time. Please, if you're enjoying this, hit that subscribe button and help me prove her wrong. It would mean everything to me. Now, back to Rhiannon's story. The servants' corridors were blessedly empty, everyone having abandoned their duties to witness the choosing. Rhiannon ran through them blindly, one hand pressed to her burning mark, the other wrapped protectively around her belly. His child. She was carrying his child while he stood before the kingdom and chose another woman. She wouldn't stay to watch him wed Morgaine, wouldn't remain in the castle where she had given him everything, her body, her heart, her foolish, desperate belief that a laundress's daughter with a gift for reading ancient texts could ever truly hold an alpha king's heart. Rhiannon reached the tiny closet she called a chamber and began packing with shaking hands. A few dresses, her mother's jade hairpin, the ginger root she'd been chewing for the morning sickness that plagued her. She paused at the narrow window, looking out at the celebration bonfires being lit across the capital. Somewhere in that throne room, Davros was accepting congratulations for his wise political choice. Morgaine was probably already planning their coronation wedding. And no one, not a single soul in this entire kingdom knew that the Alpha King's true mate was disappearing into the night with his heir growing in her womb. Rhiannon pressed a kiss to her fingertips, then touched them to the cold glass. "Goodbye, my love," she whispered to the darkness. "May your politically advantageous marriage bring you everything you chose over us." Then she pulled her cloak tight and vanished through the servants' gate, swallowed by the winter night. She didn't see the figure watching from the tower window above. She didn't see the amber eyes suddenly flare with desperate, confused awareness. And she didn't hear the howl of pure anguish that split the sky moments later, a sound so raw, so broken, that wolves across the kingdom lifted their heads in shared, instinctive grief. By the time Davros reached her empty chamber, his heart pounding with inexplicable panic he couldn't understand, Rhiannon was already gone. 4 months later, the village of Millbrook had almost stopped asking questions about their newcomer. Rhiannon had arrived in the dead of winter, a young widow fleeing grief, she'd claimed. The village elder had taken pity on her swollen belly and haunted eyes, offering her the abandoned cottage at the forest's edge in exchange for her skills with letters and numbers. She had accepted without hesitation, grateful for any shelter that put distance between her and Morvain. Now spring was attempting to break through winter's grip, and Rhiannon had become simply the teacher woman who lives by the woods. She taught the village children to read. She kept the merchants' books. She translated old deeds for the land disputes. And every night, she lay awake with her hands on her impossibly large belly, feeling movements that came from multiple directions at once. The village healer had examined her 3 weeks ago, her weathered face creasing with surprise. "Twins, girl. Maybe triplets. I've never felt so many limbs pushing at once." Rhiannon had smiled weakly and said nothing. What could she say? That she was carrying the Alpha King's children? That she had fled the capital rather than watch him marry another? That the claiming mark on her shoulder blade still burned every single night, keeping her awake with pain that should have faded months ago? Among wolfkind, rejection severed the bond completely. The mark should have disappeared within weeks, leaving only smooth skin and bitter memories. Instead, Hers pulsed with heat that never faded. It ached when the wind blew from the east, from the direction of Morvain, and sometimes, late at night when exhaustion finally claimed her, she could swear she felt something through it. A presence. A searching, a desperate, clawing need that wasn't her own. But that was impossible. Davros had chosen Morgaine. The bond between them should have dissolved the moment he made that choice. Unless the bond had never been truly severed at all. Rhiannon pushed the thought away. False hope was more poisonous than any herb in her garden. Mistress Rhiannon. The voice at her door belonged to young Pip, the miller's son. Travelers from the capital. They're at the tavern with news. Rhiannon's heart seized. What news? The Alpha King, Pip breathed, his eyes wide with fear and excitement. They say he's gone mad. The world tilted beneath Rhiannon's feet. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself. Mad? Pip nodded vigorously. The travelers say he's torn apart half the kingdom searching for someone. A woman. No one knows who she is. Only that the king will destroy anyone who stands between him and finding her. Rhiannon's hand moved to her belly. The babies, because yes, there were definitely more than one, kicked sharply, as if responding to the mention of their father. They say crops are failing in the southern provinces, Pip continued breathlessly. Wolves have gone feral, attacking livestock in broad daylight. The king's own guard has been deployed to every village within 300 miles. Questioning everyone, searching every house and barn. Searching for what? Rhiannon whispered. For her. Whoever she is, she must have done something terrible to make the king act this way. The travelers say he's offered a reward of 15,000 gold pieces for any information leading to her discovery. 15,000 gold. A fortune beyond imagination. Enough to make anyone betray anyone else. Rhiannon forced her expression to remain neutral. The affairs of kings don't concern simple folk like us. Thank your father for the news. But after Pip had gone, she sank into her chair with trembling legs. He was searching for her, but why? Why would Davros search for a woman he had publicly rejected? Why would he tear his kingdom apart for a lover he had discarded without a second glance? Unless something had been terribly, impossibly wrong that night. Unless the cold emptiness in his eyes had been something other than indifference. Movement at the tree line caught her attention through the window. Rhiannon's breath stopped. A wolf stood between the ancient oaks, massive, silver-gray, its amber eyes fixed on her cottage with an intelligence that was anything but animal. As she watched, frozen in terror, another emerged beside it, then another. 5 wolves, their gazes locked on her door. They had found her. The mark on Rhiannon's shoulder blade exploded with heat. She gasped, stumbling away from the window as agony radiated through her body. This wasn't the dull burn she'd grown accustomed to. This was searing, overwhelming, as if someone had pressed a brand directly against bone. And beneath the pain, she felt something else. A presence, massive and desperate, pushing against the edges of her consciousness. Familiar, terrifying, impossible. The babies kicked violently, movements coming from what felt like 4 different directions at once. No, Rhiannon breathed, both hands flying to her belly. No, no, no. He was here. Not just his wolves. Him. Rhiannon's eyes darted around her small cottage, calculating escape routes. The back door led to the forest, but if his wolves were already watching, they'd run her down before she made it 50 yards. The root cellar was hidden, but a wolf's nose would find her in minutes. She was trapped. The front door shuddered beneath a heavy knock. Rhiannon's heart stopped. The wolves she'd seen were in animal form they couldn't knock, which meant someone in human form stood on her threshold. Another knock, more insistent. Mistress Rhiannon, a male voice, unfamiliar. Please open the door. We mean you no harm. Rhiannon almost laughed at that. Wolves who hunted a pregnant woman across 4 months and 3 provinces meant her no harm. How reassuring. But she had no choice. Running was impossible. Hiding was futile. And if she didn't open the door willingly, they would simply break it down. She grabbed the iron poker from beside her hearth and moved toward the door. When she opened it, 3 men stood on her threshold. 2 were clearly warriors, their massive frames and alert postures marking them as the Alpha King's elite guard. But it was the 3rd man who drew Rhiannon's attention. He was older, his dark hair shot through with silver, his face weathered by decades of service, and his eyes, deep amber eyes that seemed to see straight through her, held something that looked almost like relief. "My lady," he said, and the title made Rhiannon flinch. "I am Garrick, first beta to the Alpha King. We've been searching for you for a very long time. I think you've made a mistake," Rhiannon said, her voice steadier than she felt. "My name is Rhiannon Moss. I'm a teacher and bookkeeper, nothing more." Garrick's expression shifted to something like sympathy. "You are Rhiannon, daughter of Ilara the Laundress, formerly a translator in the Royal Archives. You bear the king's claiming mark on your left shoulder blade, and you carry his children in your womb." The poker trembled in Rhiannon's grip. "How do you know about the mark?" "Because the king has described it in excruciating detail to every wolf in the realm. Because he hasn't slept more than an hour at a time in 4 months. Because he is systematically destroying everything he's built to find the mate who vanished without a trace." Garrick paused. "May we come in?" Rhiannon wanted to refuse, but her legs were shaking, her mark was burning, and the babies had gone unnaturally still, as if listening. She stepped aside. Garrick entered alone, leaving the guards at the door. He looked around her modest cottage, taking in the stacks of primers, the simple furniture, the narrow bed where she'd spent countless nights crying into her pillow. "He didn't choose her," Garrick said quietly. "Morgaine, I mean. He didn't choose her willingly." Rhiannon's knees nearly buckled. "What?" "The night of the ceremony, someone slipped a compound into the king's wine. Something derived from wolf's bane mixed with crushed moonflower and other ingredients we still haven't identified. It suppressed his wolf, severed his connection to his instincts and his bond, made him suggestible." "That's impossible," Rhiannon whispered. "We thought so too, until the effects wore off 4 days later, and the king woke screaming your name." Garrick's voice hardened. He remembered nothing of the ceremony, nothing of choosing Morgaine. "The first thing he did was run to find you. He didn't need to finish." Rhiannon sank into the nearest chair, her mind reeling. Drugged. He had been drugged. The empty eyes, the mechanical movements, the complete absence of recognition. It hadn't been rejection at all. It had been violation. "Who did this?" she demanded. "We believe House Talros, though we can't yet prove it. Morgaine's family has wanted their bloodline on the throne for 3 generations. With you gone and the king bound to their daughter by witnessed oath, they would have everything they desired." Garrick knelt before her chair. "My lady, the king is not well. The severed bond, the missing mate his wolf, has been fighting for dominance since the moment he regained his senses. If he doesn't find you soon, we fear he may go feral permanently. A wolf separated from its true mate for too long could lose itself entirely to the animal, becoming a mindless beast. And an alpha king with Davros's power going feral would become something monstrous, unstoppable." "I can't go back," Rhiannon heard herself say. "Morgaine, the Talros family, they'll kill me. They'll kill my children. Which is why I haven't told the king exactly where you are." Garrick withdrew a folded letter from his coat. "This arrived at the castle 2 weeks ago." Rhiannon took the paper with numb fingers. The seal was broken, but she could see the Talros crest pressed into the dark wax. The message inside was brief. "The false mate has been located in Millbrook. The problem will be eliminated before month's end. Long live Queen Morgaine." Rhiannon's blood turned to ice. "Assassins." Garrick nodded grimly. "We intercepted this by chance. We don't know how many have been sent or how close they are. My lady, Davros will find you with or without my help. The bond is guiding him. Getting stronger every day, he gets closer." As if to emphasize his words, Rhiannon's mark flared with heat again. "He feels that too," Garrick said quietly. "Every time your mark burns, he feels an answering fire. It's the only thing keeping him sane, knowing you're alive somewhere." Before Garrick could say more, a howl split the evening air. It came from the forest, close, filled with warning. Garrick was on his feet instantly. "They've found us." "Who?" Rhiannon demanded, rising despite her trembling legs. Through her window, she could see shapes moving between the trees. Not the silver-gray wolves who had watched her cottage earlier. These were different, darker, their movements coordinated with predatory precision. And leading them, stepping from the shadows with a crossbow raised, was a figure in black, whose face was hidden behind a bronze wolf mask. The Davros assassins had arrived. The first arrow shattered Rhiannon's window before she could draw breath to scream. Garrick moved with supernatural speed, shoving her toward the back of the cottage as glass exploded across the floor. The two guards burst through the front door, already shifting mid-stride, their human forms dissolving into massive wolves that lunged toward the tree line. "The cellar," Garrick commanded. "Now, there's no way out from the cellar," Rhiannon gasped. "You only need to survive until reinforcements arrive." Another arrow punched through the wooden wall, embedding itself inches from Rhiannon's head. She could see dark liquid glistening on its tip. "Poison," she realized aloud. "They're not trying to capture me, they're trying to kill me quickly." Garrick's jaw tightened. The Davros family can't afford witnesses. He pulled a long knife from his belt and pressed it into her hands. "The blade is silver-edged. It will wound even a shifted wolf. Use it if you must." Before Rhiannon could respond, a howl of pain erupted from outside. One of the guards, then silence. Garrick's eyes flickered amber, his wolf rising to the surface. "Stay hidden. Whatever happens, don't come out until you hear my voice." He paused. "Or the king's." But he was already gone, his body exploding into wolf form as he crashed through the ruined window to join the battle. Rhiannon stood frozen in her destroyed cottage, the silver knife clutched in her trembling hands. Through the shattered glass, she could see shapes moving in the darkness, wolves clashing with wolves, the flash of blades, the sickening sound of flesh meeting steel. Her mark burned with renewed intensity, and she gasped at the sensation that accompanied it. He was closer now, much closer. The bond between them pulsed with desperate urgency, and for the first time, Rhiannon understood that she could feel his emotions bleeding through. Rage so vast it threatened to consume everything. Fear, sharp and unfamiliar. And beneath it all, a longing so profound it made her eyes sting with tears. Through the window, she watched in horror as Garrick's wolf form was thrown against an oak tree with bone-cracking force. He struggled to rise, blood matting his silver-streaked fur, but 3 dark wolves circled him with predatory patience. He was losing. Rhiannon's gaze dropped to the cellar door. She could hide as Garrick had instructed, could wait in the darkness, and pray that help arrived before the assassins found her. But Garrick would be dead by then. The guards were already silent, and she would be cowering underground while wolves died to protect her. No, she had spent 4 months running, 4 months hiding, 4 months letting fear dictate her every choice. Not anymore. Rhiannon dropped the silver knife and pressed her palms together. The power she'd kept suppressed since childhood stirred in her chest. She had always been told to hide this gift, had always been warned that healing magic in someone of common blood would mark her as unnatural, as something to be destroyed. But she was already marked for death. What did she have left to lose? Golden light bloomed between her hands, warm and pure and ancient. Rhiannon stepped through the shattered window into the chaos of battle. The effect was immediate. Every wolf in the clearing turned to stare at the heavily pregnant woman who glowed like a fallen star. The assassin wolves hesitated, their formation breaking as instinct warred with training. Rhiannon walked toward Garrick's fallen form, her bare feet leaving prints of light in the blood-stained earth. "You will not have him," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that weren't entirely human. "You will not have any of them." She knelt beside Garrick and pressed her glowing hands to his wounds. The beta gasped as healing energy poured into his broken body, knitting bone and closing gashes with impossible speed. One of the assassin wolves lunged toward her, jaws wide. The golden light around Rhiannon flared like a sunrise. The wolf was thrown backward with a yelp of pain, its dark fur smoking where the light had touched it. It scrambled to its feet and fled into the forest, followed by 2 of its packmates, but not all of them ran. The masked figure stepped into the clearing, crossbow raised. Unlike the wolves, this assassin was fully human, unaffected by the magic that had scattered the others. "Impressive," a female voice said from behind the bronze wolf mask. "The Davros family will be very interested to learn that the king's whore is a witch." Rhiannon's power flickered. The healing she'd poured into Garrick had cost her more than she'd realized, and her reserves were dangerously low. The babies kicked frantically, as if sensing danger. The assassin's finger tightened on the trigger, and then the forest exploded. Trees splintered like kindling as something massive crashed through the undergrowth. The ground shook with the force of its approach. The remaining assassin wolves scattered in pure terror. The masked woman spun toward the sound, her crossbow swinging to track the new threat. She wasn't fast enough. A wolf the size of a warhorse burst from the tree line, its fur black as midnight, its eyes blazing with golden fire. It moved with speed that defied physics, crossing the clearing in a single bound. Its jaws closed around the assassin's crossbow arm with a sickening crunch. The woman's scream was cut short as the massive wolf shook her like a rag doll, then flung her broken body into the darkness. The wolf turned in a circle, searching for more threats, finding none. Then those burning golden eyes fixed on Rhiannon. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only stare at the creature that radiated power like heat from a bonfire. The wolf approached her slowly, each step deliberate. Blood dripped from its muzzle. Its massive body blocked out the moonlight. And yet, when it finally stood before her, it lowered its great head and pressed its nose gently to her belly. The babies kicked all of them at once, what felt like 6 or 7 tiny limbs responding to their father's presence. The wolf made a sound that was almost a whimper. "Davros?" Rhiannon whispered. The shift happened in the space between heartbeats. One moment, a wolf stood before her. The next, a man knelt in the blood-soaked earth, his hands hovering over her stomach, as if he was afraid to touch her. He looked up, and Rhiannon saw that the Alpha King was weeping. "You're alive," Davros breathed, his voice raw, broken, as if he'd been screaming for months. "You're alive, and you're—" His eyes dropped to her swollen belly. His hand reached toward it, then stopped, hovering inches from her dress. "May I?" The question shattered something in Rhiannon's chest. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in 3 kingdoms, was asking permission to touch his own children. She took his hand and pressed it to her stomach. The babies kicked immediately, movements coming from multiple places at once. Davros's eyes widened, his palm flattening against her belly to feel more. "Children," he whispered. "Our children. Rhiannon, why didn't you tell me?" The question broke the spell. Rhiannon stepped backward, pulling away from his touch. The warmth of the moment dissolved into the cold reality of everything that had happened. "Tell you?" Her voice came out sharper than intended. "When would I have done that, Davros? Before or after you chose Morgaine in front of the entire kingdom?" Davros flinched as if she'd struck him. "I didn't choose her. I would never. I saw you." The words tore from her throat. "I was there. I watched you take her hand. I watched you stand before our people and declare she would be your queen while I hid in the gallery like some shameful secret." "Rhiannon, please." Davros rose to his feet, his hands reaching for her. "I was drugged. Garrick told you." "How convenient," Rhiannon spat, even as her heart cracked at the agony in his eyes. "Convenient?" Davros's voice hardened. "You think any part of this has been convenient? I've spent 4 months hunting for you. 4 months fighting my wolf for control. 4 months watching my kingdom crumble while I tore apart every village, every forest, every corner of the realm searching for the mate who vanished without a word. Because you rejected me, because I was violated." The roar shook the clearing. The word hung between them, terrible and true. "Do you think I chose this?" Davros's voice cracked. "Do you think I wanted to wake up bound to a woman I despise while the woman I love was gone? While our bond was screaming in my chest and I had no idea where you were, or if you were even alive?" His vulnerability was like a knife between Rhiannon's ribs. She had never expected to see this, the most powerful wolf in 3 kingdoms laid bare before her. "I thought you'd thrown me away," she whispered. "I thought everything you said was a lie, that I was just a convenient distraction until you were forced to choose someone worthy of your crown." Davros closed the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands cupped her face, tilting it up until she had no choice but to meet his gaze. "You are worthy of everything," he said fiercely. "You are my mate, my true mate. The bond recognized you before I even knew your name. Do you think I would give that up for politics? For power? For anything in this world or any other?" A sob escaped Rhiannon's throat. She had held the grief inside for so long, had built walls around her broken heart to keep functioning. But now, with his hands on her face and his words cracking through her defenses, those walls were crumbling. "I waited for you," she choked out. "That night, I waited in my chamber for you to come. I was going to tell you about the babies. I'd practiced the words 100 times. Davros's expression shattered. "Rhiannon, and when you didn't come, I went to find you. Instead, I found you choosing her, kissing her hand, looking at her like she was your future, while I stood in the shadows with your children growing inside me." She pounded her fist against his chest, but there was no strength behind the blow. "Do you know what that felt like?" Davros caught her wrist and pressed her palm flat against his heart. "Yes," he said quietly. "I know exactly what it felt like. Because I've spent every moment since that night living with the knowledge that I failed you, that something was done to me that made me betray the most important person in my existence." His heartbeat thundered beneath her hand, strong and steady and achingly familiar. "I haven't touched Morgaine," he continued. "I haven't even been in the same room with her since I regained my senses. The council is threatening rebellion. Half the noble houses have withdrawn their support." He laughed bitterly. "They think I've gone mad, Rhiannon, and perhaps I have, but I would burn this kingdom to ashes before I let anyone but you sit beside me on that throne." The mark on her shoulder blade flared with heat, and she felt his answering pulse through the bond. His claim on her, incomplete as it was, resonated with something deep in her soul. "The Davros family sent assassins," she heard herself say. "They want me dead." Davros's eyes hardened to molten gold. "Then the Davros family will learn what happens to those who threaten my mate." A rustle from the tree line interrupted them. Garrick stepped forward, his body still bearing marks of battle despite Rhiannon's healing. "My king," the beta said carefully. "The assassin you dealt with was Mirella Davros, Morgaine's younger sister." The name hung in the air like poison. "Then there's no more pretense," Davros said grimly. "The Davros family has openly attempted to murder the true queen of Morvain. This is war." His hand moved to her belly again, cradling the curve where his children grew. "They tried to take everything from me, my mate, my heirs, my very will. I will not allow them to threaten our family ever again." A howl rose from the forest, long and mournful. More followed, dozens of voices, joining in a chorus that seemed to shake the very earth. "The king's wolves have arrived," Garrick said. "All of them." Rhiannon looked past Davros to see shapes emerging from the darkness, wolves of every size and color, filling the clearing, their eyes gleaming with fierce loyalty. "We go to Morvain tonight," Davros announced. "Rhiannon comes with us. The Davros family answers for their crimes before the next moon rises." Rhiannon wanted to protest, wanted to argue that she was in no condition to travel, that the babies needed rest. But when Davros looked at her, his golden eyes soft with tenderness, she found she couldn't refuse him anything. "Together?" she asked quietly. Davros pressed his forehead to hers. "Always, my heart. From this moment until my last breath, together." The journey to Morvain should have taken 4 days. Davros's wolves made it in 2. Rhiannon rode in front of the Alpha King on his massive black horse, his arm wrapped securely around her waist, his body shielding her from the biting wind. She had protested at first, but Davros had simply lifted her onto his saddle and silenced her objections with a look that brooked no argument. "My wolf needs you close," he'd said, his voice rough with emotion. 4 months of separation nearly destroyed us both. I won't let you out of my sight until the bond is completed, and every threat to your safety is eliminated." So Rhiannon had relented, leaning back against his chest and feeling his heartbeat against her spine. The babies seemed to approve, settling into peaceful stillness for the first time in weeks. As they rode through the night, Davros told her everything. He told her about waking from the drugged haze to find Morgaine in his chambers, attempting to consummate a union he had no memory of agreeing to. About the horror that had flooded through him when he realized what had been done. About throwing Morgaine from his rooms and ordering her confined pending investigation. He told her about the search that had consumed every waking moment since. The wolves sent to every corner of the kingdom, the sleepless nights spent poring over maps and reports. The way his control had frayed with each passing day until his own advisors feared to be in the same room with him. "My wolf knew you were alive," he murmured against her hair. "The bond never fully broke. Every time I tried to accept that you might be gone forever, I would feel a pulse of warmth. And I knew you were out there somewhere, waiting for me to find you." Rhiannon's hand moved to cover his where it rested on her belly. "I felt it too," she admitted. "The burn that never faded. The dreams that felt more real than waking." Davros stiffened behind her. "You dreamed of me? Every night. You came to my cottage. You spoke to me in words I could somehow understand. You told me you loved me, that you would find me, that nothing would keep us apart. Those weren't dreams." Davros's voice was hoarse. "My wolf, when I slept, he would reach for you through the bond. I thought I was only imagining it, but you actually felt." He trailed off, overcome. Rhiannon turned in the saddle to look at him. In the silver moonlight, she could see the shadows under his eyes, the gauntness of his cheeks, the evidence of months of suffering etched into every line of his face. "We've both been through so much," she whispered. "Apart when we should have been together." Davros's hand came up to cup her face. "Never again," he vowed. "Whatever comes next, we face it as one." He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tender and questioning. But when Rhiannon's hand curled around the back of his neck, pulling him closer, something ignited between them. The bond roared to life. Rhiannon gasped against his mouth as sensation flooded through her. His emotions crashed into hers with overwhelming force. Love, desperate and all-consuming. Desire, barely held in check. And beneath it all, a fierce protectiveness that wrapped around her like armor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Davros's eyes were blazing gold. "Soon," he promised, his voice rough with restrained need. "When you're safe, when our enemies are destroyed, I will complete the bond properly, and you will never doubt my devotion again." They reached the outskirts of Morvain, as dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. The capital city spread before them, its ancient spires reaching toward the heavens. But something was wrong. Smoke rose from several quarters of the city. The distant sound of shouting reached their ears. And on the great banner that flew above the castle gates, the royal crest had been replaced by the copper serpent of House Talros. "No," Garrick breathed. "They wouldn't dare." Davros's arm tightened around Rhiannon as a growl built in his chest. "They've taken the castle." "How is that possible?" Rhiannon demanded. "You've been gone barely 2 days." "The Talros family has been planning this for months, perhaps years. They didn't just want me to marry Morgaine. They wanted to replace me entirely." A rider emerged from the city gates, galloping toward them at reckless speed. One of Davros's scouts, his face ashen with fear. "My king," he gasped. The Talros family struck at midnight. They had allies within the guard. "Lord Talros has declared himself regent, claiming you've gone mad. Lady Morgaine has been named queen." A snarl tore from Davros's throat. "There's more," the scout continued. "They've taken hostages. The servants who remained loyal to you, the guards who refused to bend the knee. They're to be executed at noon as traitors." He paused. "All 42 of them." Rhiannon felt the blood drain from her face. Including the old translator who served in the archives. the scout said. The one who helped the lady during her time at court. Isadora. The name struck Rhiannon like a physical blow. Isadora, who had taught her to read ancient texts, who had covered for her absences when she slipped away to meet Davros in secret, who had suspected the truth and never breathed a word. We have to save them, Rhiannon said fiercely. Davros looked down at her. Rhiannon, you can't enter that city. If the Talros family captures you, if we do nothing, 42 innocent people die. I won't have their blood on my hands. I won't let Isadora die because she was kind to me. For a long moment, the Alpha King was silent. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Something fierce, something proud. My queen, he murmured. Even now you think of others before yourself. He turned to address the army of wolves assembled behind them. The Talros family believes they've won. They believe their treachery has succeeded, that their false queen sits secure upon a stolen throne. His eyes blazed with golden fire. They are wrong. A howl rose from the assembled wolves, hundreds of voices joining in a chorus of fury and loyalty. Today we take back what is ours. Today we show the traitors what happens to those who threaten our king, our true queen, and the heirs she carries. The army surged forward, a tide of fur and fang and righteous rage. And at its head, with his mate held close against his heart, the Alpha King rode to reclaim his throne. The battle for Morvain was brutal and brief. The Talros family had expected resistance. They had not expected an army of wolves driven by 4 months of rage and the primal need to protect their king's mate and unborn children. Rhiannon watched from a protected position on the hillside as Davros led the charge. Even from this distance, she could feel his fury through the bond, a blazing inferno that scorched through her veins. His wolf form was terrible to behold, a shadow of death that tore through the Talros defenders like parchment. Within an hour, the outer walls had fallen. Within 2, the castle gates lay in splinters. But as the sun climbed toward its noon peak, a messenger came running with news that turned Rhiannon's blood to ice. My lady, he gasped. Lord Talros has barricaded himself in the throne room with the hostages. He says if the king doesn't surrender, he'll execute them all, starting with the old translator. Rhiannon was moving before she consciously decided to, ignoring the protests of the guards Davros had left to protect her. Her body ached from the journey, her back screaming with the strain of carrying multiple babies, but none of that mattered. She had to reach the throne room. The castle corridors were chaos. Bodies of fallen wolves littered the stone floors. The scent of blood hung thick in the air. But Rhiannon pushed through it all, following the pull of the bond toward where she knew Davros would be. She found him at the doors of the throne room, held back by Garrick and 3 other wolves. You can't go in there, Garrick was saying. It's exactly what Talros wants. If I do nothing, innocent people die, Davros replied, his voice ragged. Davros, Rhiannon called out. He spun at the sound of her voice. Rhiannon, what are you doing here? I told you to stay. I know what you told me. She stopped before him, tilting her chin up defiantly. And I'm telling you that I won't hide while others die in my place. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment the Talros family decided I was an obstacle to their ambitions. Rhiannon placed her hand on his chest. It became my fight the moment I fell in love with you. Davros's breath caught. In all their months together, through all their whispered conversations and stolen moments, neither of them had ever spoken those words aloud. Rhiannon, he whispered. I love you, she repeated, stronger now. I loved you when I thought you'd betrayed me. I loved you through 4 months of exile and heartbreak. And I won't let that love make me a coward now. She turned toward the throne room doors. Lord Talros, she called out. I am Rhiannon, the woman your family has tried so hard to destroy. I'm coming in, alone. Rhiannon? No. Davros grabbed her arm. She looked back at him. Trust me, please. Something passed between them through the bond. Not words, but understanding, faith, and beneath it all, a desperate prayer. Davros released her arm. Rhiannon pushed open the doors and stepped into the throne room. The scene inside was worse than she'd imagined. 42 hostages knelt in a line before the raised dais, their hands bound, their faces pale with terror. Armed Talros soldiers stood behind them with blades drawn, and on the throne that should have belonged to Davros sat Lord Cedric Talros, his copper hair gleaming in the torchlight. Beside him stood Morgaine. "So, this is the creature that's caused so much trouble," Morgaine said, her lip curling with disdain. "A laundress's daughter with a swollen belly. How pathetic." Rhiannon ignored her, her gaze finding Isadora among the hostages. "Run, child," Isadora whispered. "Run while you can." "I'm done running." Rhiannon turned to face Lord Talros. "You want the king to surrender. I'm offering you something better." Talros's eyebrow rose. "And what might that be?" "Me." Rhiannon placed her hand on her belly. "The king's mate and his unborn heirs. Take me as your hostage instead. Release the others." "No!" The roar came from beyond the doors. Davros's anguish tore through the bond like shattered glass, but Talros was smiling. "An interesting proposition. Very well, I accept." "Father, wait," Morgaine interjected. "We should simply kill her now. Patience, daughter. A dead hostage has no value, but a living one, especially one carrying the royal heirs." Talros's smile widened. "Guards, release the prisoners. Secure the girl." The hostages were cut free, stumbling toward the doors in confused relief. Isadora tried to reach Rhiannon, but soldiers pushed her back with the others. As rough hands grabbed Rhiannon's arms, she felt strangely calm. The bond with Davros pulsed with his panic, his rage, his desperate need to reach her. But beneath all of that, she could feel something else, the babies stirring within her, and with them, a power she'd never felt before. The children weren't just Davros's heirs. They were the product of a true mate bond, something that hadn't occurred in the royal bloodline for 6 generations. And those children, even unborn, carried magic of their own. Magic that was now awakening in response to the threat against their mother. Golden light began to emanate from Rhiannon's belly. Talros's eyes widened. "What is this?" The light spread, flowing through her limbs. But unlike the healing magic she'd used before, this was different. Wilder. More primal. This was the power of the wolf. Pain exploded through Rhiannon's body as bones began to shift. "No," she gasped, falling to her knees. "Not now. Please, not now." But the transformation wouldn't be denied. 4 months of suppressed change, held back by her own fear and resistance, demanded release. The baby's awakening power had triggered what she'd been fighting since the night Davros bit her. She was becoming a wolf, and she was doing it in the middle of an enemy stronghold, surrounded by soldiers who wanted her dead. The throne room doors exploded inward. Davros burst through in full wolf form, his massive black body hurtling toward her even as her own body tore itself apart. His howl shook the rafters, a sound of pure anguish and protective fury. Talros soldiers rushed to intercept him. Morgaine screamed orders. Chaos erupted on every side, and Rhiannon, caught in the agony of transformation, could only pray that she survived long enough to meet her mate on the other side. The pain was like nothing Rhiannon had ever experienced. Every bone in her body shattered and reformed. Every muscle tore and rebuilt itself. Her skin rippled and split as fur pushed through from beneath. She screamed, but the sound that emerged was no longer human. Through the haze of agony, she was aware of Davros fighting his way toward her. His massive wolf form scattered Talros soldiers like leaves, but he wasn't fast enough. Lord Talros had drawn a blade, a sword that gleamed with an unnatural silver sheen. Wolf's bane-coated steel. "If I can't have the throne," Talros snarled, raising the blade over Rhiannon's convulsing body, "then neither will he." The sword descended and stopped. Rhiannon's hand, no longer fully human, had caught the blade. Silver-white fur covered her fingers, and claws that hadn't existed moments before dug into the poisoned steel. The wolf's bane burned against her palm, but she held firm. "No," she growled, and her voice carried harmonics that resonated with ancient power. The transformation completed in a surge of golden light. Where a pregnant woman had knelt, a wolf now stood. Her fur was the color of moonlight on snow, her eyes blazing with amber fire. She was smaller than Davros's massive form, but no less magnificent, and she was angry. Rhiannon lunged. Her jaws closed around Talros's sword arm with savage precision. The lord screamed as bones crunched, the poisoned blade clattering to the floor. She shook him once, twice, then flung him aside. Across the hall, Morgaine shrieked, "Kill her! Kill them both!" But the remaining Talros soldiers were backing away. They'd signed on to support a coup, not to face two enraged wolves of the royal bloodline. One by one, they dropped their weapons and fled. Davros reached her side, his black fur pressing against her white. Through the bond, she felt his overwhelming relief, his awe, his fierce pride. "You shifted," his voice echoed in her mind. "Rhiannon, you shifted." "I had motivation," she replied, surprised by how natural the mental communication felt. Davros made a sound that might have been a laugh. "My brave, impossible mate." Morgaine had retrieved her father's fallen sword and was advancing toward them with murder in her eyes. "You ruined everything," Morgaine hissed. "You were supposed to be nobody. Instead, you've destroyed my family, stolen my crown, and now you stand there in a form you don't deserve." Rhiannon shifted back to human, her body flowing through the change with surprising ease. She stood before her enemy, one hand resting on her belly where the baby still grew, miraculously unharmed. "I didn't steal anything," Rhiannon said quietly. "The bond between Davros and me was forged by fate, not ambition. Your family tried to break it with poison and lies. All you accomplished was proving that true mates can't be separated by the schemes of lesser wolves." Morgaine screamed and charged. She never reached her target. Davros's jaws closed around her wrist, forcing her to drop the sword. He shifted back to human form, holding the struggling Morgaine immobile, while his wolves flooded the hall to secure the remaining Talros family members. "Morgaine of House Talros," Davros announced. "You and your family are charged with treason, attempted murder of the true queen, and conspiracy against the crown. You will face judgment before the assembled packs." "You can't do this," Morgaine spat. "You chose me before the entire kingdom." "I declared nothing." Davros's eyes blazed gold. "A puppet drugged into compliance is not a king making choices. The ceremony is void. It always was." Guards brought cloaks to cover them both. Davros wrapped Rhiannon in warm fabric with careful hands. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. Rhiannon paused, taking inventory. Her body felt different now, stronger, more alive. The constant ache that had plagued her was gone, replaced by a thrumming vitality. "I'm well," she said. "Better than well." Davros's hand found her belly, and his eyes widened as he felt movement from multiple distinct places. "The children," he breathed. "Children," Rhiannon corrected softly. "I think there are at least 3 of them, maybe 4. The transformation, I think it actually helped. Their magic triggered the change. They saved us all." Davros made a choked sound and pulled her into his arms. Through the bond, she felt the walls he'd built around his heart finally crumbling. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered. "When Talros raised that sword—" "I know." Rhiannon pulled back to cup his face in her hands. "But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Not ever again." Davros's eyes searched her face. "The bond," he said hoarsely. "It needs to be completed properly, if you'll have me." Rhiannon thought of everything they'd been through. The secret meetings, the whispered promises, the devastating betrayal that hadn't truly been a betrayal at all, the months of separation, the battle and the blood, and the terrifying, glorious moment when she'd embraced the wolf within. "I'll have you," she said. "I've always been yours, Davros, from the moment we met." He kissed her then, in front of the assembled wolves and the defeated Talros family and the hostages who were weeping with relief. When they broke apart, Davros tilted his head, baring his throat to her in the ancient gesture of a wolf offering himself to his mate. "Claim me," he said. "Make it complete." Rhiannon understood instinctively what to do. Her wolf rose within her, guiding her movements as she pressed her lips to the spot where his neck met his shoulder. She felt his pulse thundering beneath her mouth. Her teeth sank into his flesh. The bond exploded between them. It wasn't pain. It was completion. Two halves of a single soul finally becoming whole. Rhiannon felt Davros's essence pour into her as hers flowed into him. Every memory, every emotion, every secret corner of their hearts laid bare to each other. She saw the night of the ceremony through his eyes, not the empty puppet she'd witnessed from the gallery, but the horror of waking 4 days later with no memory of what he'd done. She felt the desperation of his search, the way his wolf had howled in anguish every night, the slow descent toward madness as days turned to weeks and weeks to months with no sign of her. She felt his terror when he'd seen Davros raise that sword over her convulsing body. Felt the way his heart had stopped in his chest, the way his wolf had screamed with primal fury, driving him forward with strength he didn't know he possessed. Felt the overwhelming relief when her transformation had completed, and she'd stood before him, magnificent and powerful and alive. She saw herself through his eyes. Not a nobody servant, but a woman of extraordinary courage and compassion. The translator who had captivated a king with her brilliance and fierce spirit. The mother of his children, his fated mate, chosen by destiny itself, the most precious soul in his entire existence. And he saw himself through hers. Not a king who had failed her, but a man who had fought against impossible odds to find her. Who had torn his kingdom apart rather than accept a false mate. Who loved her with a ferocity that transcended poison and politics and even death itself. A man worthy of the love she'd never stopped feeling, even in the darkest moments of her exile. When Rhiannon finally released him, they were both trembling. "My queen," Davros breathed, pressing his forehead to hers. "My king," she answered. Around them, wolves began to howl, a celebration of victory, of justice, of a true mate bond, finally, completely, eternally sealed. In the weeks that followed, the Davros family faced judgment before the assembled packs of Morvain. Lord Cedric was executed for his crimes, his final moments spent begging for a mercy he'd never shown to others. Morgaine was exiled to the frozen wastes beyond the northern border, stripped of her name and her wolf, condemned to live out her days as the nothing she'd once accused Rhiannon of being. The kingdom healed slowly but surely. The crops that had withered under the weight of their alpha's suffering began to grow again. The wolves who had grown feral, driven mad by the broken bond between their king and his true mate, returned to their senses as the completed bond radiated peace and stability throughout the realm. The people of Morvain celebrated their true queen with a joy that surprised Rhiannon. She'd expected suspicion, even hostility, from those who'd witnessed the ceremony and believed her an interloper. Instead, she found acceptance. The wolves could feel the truth of the bond between her and Davros. They could sense that this was what fate had always intended. And on a warm spring evening, as the sun set over Morvain, in shades of gold and rose, Rhiannon gave birth to triplets. 2 boys with their father's dark blonde hair and their mother's healing gift. A girl with silver-white fur when she shifted, and eyes that already gleamed with amber fire. Davros held his children with tears streaming down his face, his massive warrior's hands impossibly gentle. "Thank you," he whispered to Rhiannon, who lay exhausted but radiant in their bed. "For fighting for us, for believing even when I gave you every reason not to." Rhiannon reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the claiming mark on his throat, the mark that matched the one on her shoulder blade, both now healed into beautiful silver scars that proclaimed their bond to all who saw them. "I never stopped believing," she said softly. "Even in the darkest moments, something inside me knew. We were always meant to find our way back to each other." Davros leaned down to kiss her, their children nestled safely between them. "Always," he agreed. "In this life and every life that follows, you are my heart, Rhiannon, my mate, my home." Outside their window, the wolves of Morvain lifted their voices in a howl of joy. And in the great tapestry of the kingdom's history, a new chapter was woven. The story of a laundress's daughter who became a queen. of an alpha king who tore apart his realm to find his true love, of a bond that couldn't be broken by poison or politics or even the cruelest twists of fate. They had found each other against all odds, and they would never be parted again. Thank you so much for reading. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who loves alpha romance. Your support means the world to me and helps me keep creating stories like this one. Until next time, may you all find your fated mate.